everybody, this is Caitlin. It's been a minute. I've been pretty busy. I had a baby a few months ago. His name's Jude. He's pretty cute, but he takes up a lot of my time. I ended up quitting my job at the end of my maternity leave and then was looking for a new job for a while and just recently got one at a new hospital, so that's pretty cool. But yada yada yada, been busy basically. So I haven't had time to film, but I have been reading. This first book, River of Stars by Guy Gabriel Kay. This is not what I expected it to be. It was still pretty good. I did really enjoy it, and I'm definitely going to read more from this author. There are a couple of reasons why this wasn't what I expected. First, this is a duology, and this is the second book in a duology. I had no idea. It didn't seem to really affect my reading of it, though. I don't think you have to read the first book. Maybe it illuminates some things that I'm not even aware need to be illuminated, but I think it read pretty well on its own. It is kind of alternate history. That's the other thing that I didn't expect. I thought that this was going to be a straight-up fantasy novel, and it's not. It's a story that sort of mirrors China's history, but it's a fantasy history with hardly any fantasy elements other than that. There is one tiny magical element in here, but it's almost insignificant. So this is more of like fantasy alternate history rather than, or not even really alternate history, but just taking a certain period in China and a certain dynasty and then building your own world based on that. I don't know much about Chinese history, so I'm not going to go into that any more than that. This was written really beautifully. I thought it was pretty lyrical. I wasn't expecting that. And it follows multiple characters. There was a couple of characters that had a relationship that I expected to happen. But apart from that, I thought that this wasn't a very predictable book. I mean, the overall arching plot of the story isn't even too important. It's just more about how it happens, really. They play with fate, the idea of fate and whether it exists or whether we're just making our own fates, whether everything's just sort of random, and the idea of legends and the real people behind legends and the real events behind legends. And I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I think I'm going to delve into this guy's heavy fantasy, though, because I want to read like fantasy by him, as opposed to something like this. And I think I'm going to read the first book in this series too and see if that helps illuminate some things in this book. Maybe. I don't know. I ended up giving this 4 stars, by the way. So the next book that I read was, I think this one, The Circle. This is the Engelsfors, I have no idea how to say that, trilogy. This is book 1. Low battery, whoops. And it is by Sarah B. Elfgren and Mats Strandberg. It is translated from the Swedish by Per Carlson. This is a young adult book, and usually I don't like young adult books. I mean, they're okay, but I don't want to read books that are just okay for me, so I tend to avoid that genre. But this was surprising. I thought that it was a little bit better than what I am used to reading, and that's not to say that young adult sucks or anything like that. I mean, if you read young adult and you love young adult, great, but it's just not for me. For me, it tends to get a little formulaic, and the romantic plot lines tend to overpower the other plot lines, and yeah, I just get tired of reading that book, you know. So this was different in that it had multiple narratives, multiple characters, and I thought that the portrayal of all of these characters was pretty realistic. It's about a coven of witches who, and teenagers. The coven is made up of teenagers that go to this one high school, and there is a threat to their lives, basically. It was fun. It was really fun, and I liked it a lot, and I think I'm going to be reading the second one. I think I ended up giving it 3.5 or 4 stars, something like that. Probably 3.5. So next I read a book that a lot of people have read, Nevermore, The Trials of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is a children's book. It's the first in a series. Like I said, it's been going around BookTube a lot. So I really don't have to say much about this other than I really thought it was fun. I really enjoyed it. I tried to get my 12-year-old to read it, and she thought it was boring. So there's that. I think, unlike me, she's really into that those young adult tropes and that formulaic sort of young adult novel. So without all those romantic entanglements, she wasn't really into this. But it's really fun, and if you're an adult that likes to read children's fiction, I would recommend it. I gave this 4 stars, I think. Lots of 4 stars. This next book was a collection of short fiction, A Trib and Other Stories by Eli I don't know, Williams. And this I didn't love. I thought that it was good, but there was just nothing about it that really sang to me. Some of the stories were really straightforward, and then some of them played a lot with language and communication, which is the overall theme of this collection. Surprisingly, because I am a person that loves experimental fiction, the stories that played around more with the structure and language were those stories that I didn't like very much. I just didn't have any kind of emotional connection to them, I guess. It was more like an exercise as a writer, like an exercise that she had taken as a writer, that she had done and then decided to publish it. I don't know. But I didn't think that those stories were that great. And I liked the stories that were much more straightforward. There were a few of those. So yeah, this ended up just being kind of a okay sort of read for me. 3 stars. I also read Fire Sermon by Jamie Quattro. I really enjoyed this one. This is about a woman who's in a relationship that has its issues, a marriage that has some issues that have remained unresolved and sort of continue and escalate. And she has a lot of emotions that she's been sort of suffocating. And she ends up having an affair. And that's not a spoiler or anything, really. The narrative jumps around in time. It's entirely from her perspective. Jumps around in time. Some of it takes place in the past. Some of it takes place in the present. And she talks a lot about religion in here and passion. And it's super interesting. It's a really interesting mix. And I really enjoyed reading it. I thought it was beautifully written. And yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. This is a fantasy novel. It's about a young girl who becomes a badass assassin. Or not yet, I guess, because this book is just about her younger childhood. So she's not an assassin yet. But it's so fun. If you like the kind of storyline where you potentially have a chosen one sort of protagonist, and that protagonist is a female, which I love because usually those storylines are young boys, like protagonists that are the chosen one or whatever. And she might not necessarily be that in this book, but there is that possibility. And it's about training to be an assassin at a convent. And I think that's just kick-ass. And yeah, lots and lots of fun. If that sounds like something that you might like, then you should absolutely pick it up because it's really well done. I gave this a 4 out of 5. And last but not least, the book that I really want to talk about, and the book that I read most recently. Not a lot of these books are super fresh in my mind, if you notice the quick wrap-up. But this is Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. This is so beautiful and gritty and dark, and I didn't fly through it at all because it was so gritty and dark, and I had to take breaks from it. And there were points where I was thinking, you know what, I don't want to read this anymore because I didn't want certain things to happen that I knew were going to play out. And but I steeled myself and pushed through, and I'm really glad I did because it is so well written. This is about a family in Mississippi, and it's about them and what's going on within their family dynamics. There's a lot of tension in here that just builds and builds and builds, and it mirrors Hurricane Katrina, which is coming. And it's got a protagonist, this young woman who's 15, and she is an avid reader of mythology. Like, she loves mythology, and she compares herself to Medea a lot within the novel, and she has these brothers that are just like, the bond between these siblings is so good and heartbreaking. And then there's also this bond between one of her brothers and his dog that those were the parts that were really difficult for me to read, because you do see this building tension, and you know that certain things are going to happen, and you just don't want them to. But I loved this. It was about socioeconomic issues. It was about poverty and race, and yeah, really, really enjoyed it. I highly, highly recommend Jesmyn Ward now. I did read The Fire this time, which is a collection put together by her, and I did read her essay within that collection, which I enjoyed, but I didn't really get a good sense of her writing as a fiction author, and this was so fantastic. So now I'm reading Sing, Unburied Sing. I'm finding I don't have as much of an emotional connection as I did to this book, but it's still so good. So I'm basically on a Jesmyn Ward binge right now because of this book. So yeah, you should read this. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. All right, that's everything that I read. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought about them, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.